Hi everyone, I'm Professor Larkin, and today we're going to continue to talk about organizations and specifically the scope of the firm. And by the scope of the firm, we mean what boundaries should the firm set? What activities should the firm do inside of its borders, and what activities should it do outside of its borders, relying on partners or other participants in the market? We've already talked about horizontal diversification, the scope of products that a firm should offer, and we talked about the Disney case and defined what a synergy is. Today we're going to talk about three other dimensions of scope that every firm needs to think about. The first is horizontal integration. Horizontal diversification, which we've already talked about with the Disney case, is about offering new products. Horizontal integration, on the other hand, is buying competitors that offer products like your core product, buying out your main competition. When should you do that? Also talking about integration, there's the vertical scope of integration. Should we make or buy our inputs or supplies, or our upstream distributors? Then a final dimension of corporate scope is geographic diversification. When should we enter new markets? So again, we've already talked about horizontal diversification. Today we're going to talk about horizontal integration, vertical integration, and geographic diversification. So let's first turn to horizontal integration. Again, this means buying a competitor. When should you buy out your competitor versus competing against it? Well, there's three major reasons for buying a competitor. The first, and probably the most common reason to buy a competitor, is to save on costs. There might be shared costs that you have on inputs and supplies, on administration, and you can save on those, enjoy economies of scale on the cost side, and serve the same number of customers as the two combined firms with lower overall costs, and this creates value. A second reason is to increase pricing power. If you take out a competitor, you might be able to raise prices with your end consumers. This sounds really theoretically appealing, but you have to be very careful with this rationale for buying a competitor. In a lot of geographies in a lot of countries, including the US, the European Union, and most countries out there, it can be illegal to buy a competitor if your only rationale is to raise prices, because it's seen as harming consumers. So in theory, this is a good reason to buy a competitor, but in practice, governments usually view this practice very skeptically. Third reason goes straight back to what we talked about with the Disney case and synergies, and that is a competitor might have a valuable resource that's too costly or perhaps even impossible for you to build yourself. So what do? Well, you buy the competitor. So these are the three major rationales to buy a competitor. Now, there's been a lot of interesting academic research on who benefits the most from horizontal integration. Who would you guess is the main beneficiary? It's actually the company being acquired, the shareholders of the companies being bought, because companies that acquire a competitor actually usually end up paying a big premium for that acquisition. And so buying a competitor oftentimes is a value-destroying move from the point of view of the company doing the acquiring. You have to be very, very careful. There usually isn't as much value unlocked as you'd expect. Let's turn then to another dimension of integration, and that's called vertical integration. This chart is a little bit complex, but let's walk through it. We're taking the point of view of the red dot in the middle of the page, a car manufacturer. We just talked about horizontal integration, and that would mean the red dot buying this orange dot. That would be horizontal integration. Vertical integration looks just like a value chain does vertically. When should we think about, as a car manufacturer, the red dot in the middle, buying our suppliers? Buying the company that's making headlights for us or making car body molds for us. Or, as I said just a minute ago, you could also think about vertical integration in terms of buying your distributors, going upstream, buying the people that import your cars to certain locations, buying the garage owners, buying the dealerships that sell your cars. So vertical integration, as opposed to horizontal integration, is around the decision to buying your suppliers or your buyers. So you're vertically integrated. When is this a good idea? Well, the classic idea around when to engage in vertical integration has to do with an idea called holdup. And to best illustrate this topic, let's think of a case example. Again, let's talk about that car manufacturer. It's making this nice red car. To make that car, it has to put together a whole lot of inputs. And it can buy those inputs from suppliers via the market. One of the major inputs is car bodies. So the car manufacturer is going to have to buy this nice car body. Let's think that this red car is very technologically advanced, and so the machinery to build this car body doesn't exist yet. So what does the car manufacturer do? Well, it goes to its suppliers and it says, hey, we want you to invest in this very expensive capital equipment, these new robotics, this new machinery to make this really technically advanced car. And we need you as a partner to make that investment. Take the perspective a bit of the car body manufacturer, and you're told you have to make this very expensive investment in new robotics and new capital equipment in order to serve this major customer. Do you want to make that investment? Well, it's obviously going to take a lot of money for you to do so. And it's impossible to write a contract which fully specifies what the car manufacturer's responsibilities will be to you in every circumstance. What if their car fails? What if the economy goes south? What if the car manufacturer comes to you in 2 years and says, you know what, you've invested all this money in this new capital equipment, but we don't need car bodies from you anymore. There's some new supplier out there that makes even better ones at a lower cost than you do. There's just too many contingencies to write down in a contract. And so you say, wait a minute, this is a bad deal for me. There's too much risk, and I don't want to invest. We can't write a contract which fully specifies every specific contingency that might happen. It's too much of a gamble for me to invest in this very expensive equipment, and because of that, I am not going to undertake the investment. And because your supplier refuses to undertake the investment, you don't get to make your shiny new car as the car manufacturer. This is exactly the idea of holdup. Holdup is the potential for a supplier, or the same arguments could be made upstream for a buyer, to stop investments that you need in your value chain if the market changes in ways that aren't foreseen at the time the contract is written. And what holdup does is causes companies to stop investing in specialized assets that are necessary for the relationship. The reason that the capital equipment in this car supplier example are specialized is the company might not be able to use these robots for any other car manufacturer. They're specialized to the specific car bodies that you want. How do you overcome the holdup problem? Well, one classic way to do it is to just buy the car body manufacturer yourself. Then you can fully dictate the robots that they invest in. And so when do you want to invest in buying a supplier or buying an upstream buyer of yours? You invest when there's a potential holdup problem which might lead your downstream supplier or your upstream buyer not to make investments which are favorable to you. That's the classic reason to engage in vertical integration. Now let's consider the last decision that companies have to make around their corporate scope, and that is geographic diversification. Very simple idea. Take your product that you're making in your home country and offer it in a new country. It may seem like this is always a good idea, but again, let's come back to our willingness to pay minus cost framework to understand why geographic diversification oftentimes makes a lot less sense than someone might predict. First of all, diversifying internationally is a lot more costly than people think. First, the cost of your inputs almost inevitably goes up. To buy inputs in new markets, it means investing in relationships with new suppliers, or it means transporting your inputs and your supplies from your home market abroad, and that in itself is costly. So your input cost goes up. You have to customize your product in order to make it more favorable to the local markets, so you're going to engage in greater organizational costs to customize the product, and so your total costs go up as well. And then consumers in new markets oftentimes have lower willingness to pay for foreign sourced products. That's because consumers in different markets have different tastes. They oftentimes are skeptical initially of products that come from suppliers that they don't know about. Brand that you might have invested in your home country doesn't mean anything necessarily in a new market. And so because of all these factors, consumers' willingness to pay is lower. And so you're getting squeezed both on the cost and the willingness to pay side, and there just isn't a lot of room for you to capture value. And again, there's academic research that says that companies fundamentally underestimate the cost to go abroad and the willingness to pay reductions that come from being a foreign product. The Economist did a big study of American companies and European companies investing in China and found that companies have wasted billions of dollars trying to chase that elusive Chinese market. We all know the Chinese market is big and getting bigger. Consumers are earning a lot more or are willing to pay for goods and services, but the cost to serve those consumers, especially given the different tastes, has proven inordinately high, and more companies have lost money by engaging in geographic diversification in markets like China, India, and Latin America than have made money. It's actually a lot more difficult than you'd think. So now we've covered all four of the classic questions of organizational scope, and the basic message for all four of those decisions is that organizations should stay limited in scope unless there's a clear and compelling rationale to expand. Organizations are about maximizing value creation, not getting as big as possible. Getting big in and of itself is not a good rationale for organizational growth. You only want to grow big to the extent that you can create and capture value. The market is an efficient way to organize almost always, and so relying on the market, keeping yourself small and focused on your key activities is the default choice that you should make, and you should only think about expanding the scope of your activities if there's a clear and compelling reason to do so.